Demonstrators around the world are protesting today, denouncing Iran over the death of a young woman, Mahsa Amini.
Supported by many men and boys, women are calling for bodily autonomy and fundamental freedom.
The UN says more than 300 people have been killed and thousands arrested since the death of Mahsa Amini in police custody sparked nationwide protests.
And across Iran, families are mourning the deaths of their loved ones. Students and activists inside Iran are vowing to continue their resistance.
Demonstrators around the world are protesting today, denouncing Iran over the death of a young woman, Mahsa Amini.
Dearest, in the heart of Tehran, on Revolution Avenue and a stone's throw from the University of Tehran, there is an electricity substation that found itself suddenly in the spotlight almost exactly 5 years ago. This box has a lot to do with the upheavals that have beset Iran in recent months. On the 27th of December 2017, a young woman named Vida Movahed climbed up the large grey gadget, took off her white hijab, stuck it on a wooden stick and waved it in the air as a sign of protest. She drew an immediate crowd and in under 10 minutes was arrested by security officers and taken away. Movahed came to be known as the Girl of Revolution Avenue. She was subsequently sentenced in court to a year's imprisonment for her act of defiance. A few days after her arrest, workers from the National Power Company were sent to solder a triangular metal piece on top of the rectangular box so that no other woman would be tempted to climb up there and become the next girl of Revolution Avenue. It was a superficial solution to a deep socio-political divide within the country. 5 years on, if you were to stand at the counter inside the France pastry shop, one of Tehran's oldest cafes, and look outside at the substation that Movahed climbed up, the very first thing you'd notice is that a significant number of women who pass are not wearing the hijab. By now, the world knows the story of Mahsa Amini, whose death following her arrest by the morality police in September 2022 impelled the youth of Iran to take to the streets, catching the entire country off guard. In the subsequent months, much has been written and said, especially outside Iran, about the momentous reckoning taking place in the life of the Islamic Republic. There is an element of wishful thinking here, as often happens with regard to Iran, but there is also a good deal of truth. Iran is a complicated nation, and people in Tehran joke that every 6 months, this sprawling plateau of so many identities and languages transforms into a different country altogether. And yet, the Islamic Republic endures. The change which has occurred in recent months is certainly acute. Walking through the capital will reveal that a significant portion of the female population willingly continues to wear the hijab and does so insistently. However, a visible number of women also walk the streets with their heads entirely uncovered. This shift is unprecedented in the life of the Islamic Republic. Women with a variety of hairstyles and colors go about their business boldly without revealing, at least on the surface, any fear of the security forces occupying the corners of the major thoroughfares. The woman life freedom movement that evolved following Amini's death and the appearance of women on the streets of Iran not wearing the hijab is not unlike a sprint relay, with the baton first passed on the day Movahed climbed the substation. A lot of women whose basic motto is now a normal life do not necessarily know what happened on Revolution Avenue 5 years ago, and how fateful it turned out to be. The same goes for the young men who go out of their way to show solidarity, by waving victory signs and smiling widely at the women who refuse to cover their heads. In the busy Hafta Square in the heart of the city, a young woman not wearing the hijab articulates her view, saying, "I want to dress freely. My mother hardly ever removes her hijab, but I'm not my mother. Respect for difference and diversity is what makes life beautiful." And yet, on the other side of the equation, the Islamic Republic has considered the hijab a red line and an ideological foundation for the last 40 years. Many within the regime consider losing this fight synonymous with surrendering, and surrender has never been part of the Islamic Republic's playbook. But what to do when so many young women in towns, large and small, across Iran are rejecting the hijab? One strategic option, the one that the regime seems to have adopted for the time being, is to do nothing. This has led to scenes that would have been unimaginable in this country half a year ago. Young women, but not only the young, passing directly in front of security police who make no effort to arrest them. And while in Friday prayers and other platforms connected to conservative factions, the cry for a harsh crackdown continues unabated, the highest echelons of power appear to be tacitly endorsing the maxim, "Live and let live." Young women and men of school and university age are the flag bearers of the movement and paid a heavy toll during the earlier street confrontations with the security forces. More recently, prison terms and a handful of summary executions, not to mention the winter chill, have brought a hiatus for now to the street of Tehran and other cities. While the streets are quiet, the youth are still busy in the virtual world, and Iran's Generation Z is as internet savvy as youth anywhere. The regime's filtering and control of the virtual world may be able to slow internet access, but it cannot put a stop to it altogether. A teacher at Tehran's girls' school says, "My students stand up in the middle of class, shouting that they don't want to follow the lesson plan. They want to talk about the problems the country faces. These kids are angry." "Taking off my hijab is the least I can do," says a young woman who has not worn a headscarf for the past 3 months. She continues, "The government must understand that even guns aren't enough to force women to cover their heads anymore. If one day I have to go back to wearing the hijab, I'll have betrayed Mahsa and all the others who've already died for us. Every day I spend hours on YouTube and other websites. I see what's going on outside Iran. Why should there be such a divide between us and the rest of the world? Why does the government have to control our private lives? Why are Iranians so poor when our country has so much natural wealth?" It's a little past noon on Revolution Avenue, a weekday. I decide to spend half an hour inside the France pastry shop, which is more than enough time to get a sense of the women who pass by the celebrated substation. In the 30-minute interval, 61 women pass by. 32 of them have their heads completely uncovered. 16 wear their head covers reluctantly, the hair easily showing. 13 either wear a full chador or a magnae, a one-piece head covering often worn by women in government offices and schools. Inside the cafe, the numbers are similarly telling. Several university-age women wearing no hijab are busy ordering hot drinks and pastries. Leaning on the cafe's window, a young couple stares out at the pavement. The young woman, with no headscarf, points to the platform and says, "You know, that's exactly where Vida took her hijab off for the first time ever and waved it on the pole." As if on cue, at that moment, a big black van accompanied by a force of 20 motorcycles belonging to the Special Anti-Riot Police passes the spot on Revolution Avenue. Nowadays, Tehran's streets are relatively calm, despite the exaggerated and often out-of-context claims of imminent revolution that opposition television channels tiresomely broadcast into the country. As Generation Z will tell you, woman, life, freedom is on pause right now. They liken the movement to an active volcano that erupts now and then, but whose eruptions are far smaller than the major one, which is expected to happen someday. One of them says, "We're the embers under the smouldering ash. Any day we could catch on fire." The regime and its shock troops need to get it into their heads once and for all that Iran will never go back to how it used to be. Interestingly, the regime and its young people may have the same objective in mind: not going back to what once was. Why else would the sight of women not wearing the hijab have become so commonplace here? One could argue that rather than a volcano awaiting a great eruption, the Islamic Republic, after more than 4 decades of practice, has not necessarily perfected, but rather learned the art of allowing for seismic activity, sometimes even tectonic in scale, in order to preempt something of far larger a magnitude. This story is still unfolding. Yours always, A.
We take the title of the book, Women, Life, Freedom, from the protests. But this phrase, Women, Life, Freedom, according to our contributor, Kamim Mohammadi, who's Kurdish Iranian, in the original Kurdish, Jîyan Azadi, was first used in the Kurdish feminist resistance movement that forms a wing of the Kurdish Workers' Party, PKK. Its roots lie in the anti-patriarchal, anti-capitalist, Marxist-Leninist ideology of the PKK's imprisoned founder, Abdullah Öcalan, who declared, "A country can't be free unless all women are free." But we've just come out of a time when there have been a series of smaller protests, starting from 2017 up until the women's protests, where dock workers were on strike, oil workers were on strike, teachers were on strike, pensioners were on strike. You know, it's been very difficult in Iran in terms of with sanctions and with the corruption of a religious government, so that people have been disgruntled. But the death of Jina Mahsa Amini was a galvanizing force. And also the people who were arrested, the people who were executed, the people who were killed during the arrest, usually they were of a younger generation. What it means to create artwork or to protest in a totalitarian regime, the reality is very stark. On one hand, it's, you know, people have been executed for protesting. You know, they've been hung by the neck. Because the consequences of supporting the Women, Life, Freedom protests are so high, people have been, when I first approached people saying that I wanted to do a book, in the beginning many people said that they would contribute to the book, but they wanted to be anonymous. And then as they knew me, as they got to know me as an editor, but also there were people who were vouching for me, they decided that they would use their names. But there were also some people who had already had run-ins with the regime and that they were nervous about contributing directly to the book. So I met them through third parties, or I did work through third parties, so that they didn't have to be in contact directly with me. And for those contributors that were nervous, we made sure that even the contracts that they were signing for the book, that we were careful not to mention the title of the name of the book in the contracts, or we had to walk a fine line to bring in the material. Music has been very important in Iran, but there have been women's voices that have been absent in national song. And one of the most moving images from social media during the protest was a woman in a mosque, but standing inside near a mosque, singing a praise song, singing. And the guards of the mosque came up to her and they tried to stop her. But she used this hand movement. She pushed them away and she kept singing. And it was one of the most moving aspects of the social media coming from the protests. People have written songs and made their careers, especially the rappers, of criticizing the government. And Tumaj Salehi is one of them. Let's hear it. Some of the artists in the book have used artwork as a way of spreading the message and keeping the revolution alive. And one of those artists is Rashi Ruzbahani. When I came to Rashi's work, there was one image in particular that completely blew me away. And this is an image, this is a digital illustration. It's called Weapon. And it shows a box of sanitary pads, and she's named the brand. She says the brand name is called Revolution, and it's bulletproof winged sanitary napkins.
That women in protest were covering CCTVs with sanitary pads, and it was just so the security forces can't recognize their faces. And I think it was quite interesting to see that some very ordinary object, a feminine product, is used as a weapon to fight against the system.
And what was happening during the protests is that women who were streaming out of the metro in Tehran, who were going to the protests, who weren't wearing hijabs, they were being surveyed, or their photographs were being filmed by CCTV cameras in the metro. And what they did was that they took their fresh sanitary napkins and they climbed up, they put them over the cameras. And that was a way that they ensured that the government didn't have their pictures and they couldn't be identified. And I kind of felt that was the power of the artwork during the revolution. And is that suddenly we understood the power of a sanitary napkin. Another artist that I was very taken with their work is Mansoure Baghavi, who would use women's hair to fashion these tapestries. And the tapestry that we're showing in the book is called A Mirror in Front of You, News, a woman wounded with 500 shotgun pellets. And it shows the back of a naked woman. Her braid is coming down her back, but also you can see the pellet wounds on her back. And this is all done with human hair. Really interesting was if you look at the photography in the book, particularly this series by Shiva Kademi, The Smarties. And Shiva she had just moved to the capital, Tehran, and she was struck by these young women who color their hair and they don't wear hijabs. And this was in 2019. So there was a group of young women who colored their hair lurid colors. They didn't wear the hijab. They were being stopped on the streets. People were yelling at them. The authorities were trying to get at them. And yet, no, they had decided these were the young women in the vanguard of women, life, freedom protests of the revolution. And I think it's important to celebrate them and to show their portraits. And what was really interesting when I first saw the series, when I first saw the portraiture, the way in which the young women looked directly into Shiva's camera, and that they are totally themselves. They're not how can I put it? They're not trying to perform for the camera. They are authentically themselves. And I think that Shiva's portraits are a very authentic portrayal of a generation. It's been also very interesting in the protests how other so-called marginal groups in Iran have joined in. And not so marginal groups like the oil workers of Abadan have joined in, the people who run the bazaars have joined in, but also queer Iranians have joined in. Other people who feel that the way they look, that they're being targeted, or their sexuality, they're being targeted, they've joined in. It isn't that it's just women calling for their lives and freedoms. It's generations of people calling for their lives and freedoms. And even older generations who have felt that their opportunities have been stifled or their creative work has been stifled because of who they are, whether they're men, women, or queer, or trans, that their lives have been stifled because they don't fit into this ideal religious mold. That it's not just about a piece of cloth on your hair. It's about the opportunities a young woman has in society.